So if I've understood your view, you say we need a lockdown that suppresses the virus, not stops it. The word you use is stopped, which is why I got confused, because we know we can't stop the virus, right? So we want a lockdown to suppress the virus with the full knowledge that when we lift it again, it will come back. But you're saying the solution to that then is to have track and trace ready by then.
Correct.
Will track and trace be ready within a month?
Well, could certainly be made hugely more successful than it is now. Hugely. It takes far too long for people to get a test, far too long for them to get to the results, far too few are contacted to find their contacts from them, and far too few of those are actually going to isolate.
So you'd like to suppress, again, just so I understand your view, you'd like to suppress the virus because you concede that lockdowns don't kill the virus or stop it. So you'd like to suppress the virus until we can get track and tracing done and we can deal with the danger of hospital capacity overflow. And you're saying you want to stop people dying from it in the meanwhile. Do you, in your reasoning, also consider the potential costs and deaths from having a lockdown and weigh them up?
Well, of course. You can't have a response to this virus that doesn't take into account the economic factors and the social factors and the psychological factors, all of that. But all of that damage is caused by only one thing, and that's the virus. And therefore, we have to stop the virus. We have to stop it spreading. Yep. We have to stop it being endemic in some communities. When we lifted the last lockdown, it was continued to spread and was still spreading in those.
And so what's the cost of that per day? This lockdown you're advocating for, have you looked at the costing? Because again, I imagine as a public health expert, you weigh all these things up before you make a recommendation. So when you say people are dying, do we know how many die as a consequence of lockdown and what the cost per day for lockdown is versus the cost of not doing it?
Well, I haven't seen the cost per day. I'm not sure if the government has ever produced that. Of course, there is an enormous cost. This virus is producing a huge cost.
Can I give you a
monetary cost and a cost? Of course you can.
I would imagine, though, as a public health expert, you'd have some idea.
The cost per person?
No, per day for the country, for a national lockdown.
The cost to whom?
To the government, to the country. Yeah. Because you've recommended a harsh lockdown, and I'm wondering if you've looked at all of the the entire picture, and compared it to not doing it, and decided based upon both cases what the best outcome is. So I'm asking you whether you've looked at the costs of locking down, how much it costs the country, and you said you want to save lives. I'm asking if you've looked at how many lives will be lost because of lockdown.
It is very, very clear, and the evidence is extraordinarily clear, that the countries who bring the virus under control and keep the numbers low have the least damage to their economy. The UK has had huge death toll and a huge amount of infection, and it has done enormous damage. So
what is the cost then? What is the cost per day for the national lockdown that you're recommending?
I don't know what the national cost is. We and Independent Sage, we provide scientific advice. Yep. And it is for the government and the exchequer to deal with the finances.
Yeah, but your scientific advice is that people will die, right, if we don't lock down. So I'm assuming you've also looked at how many people will die if we lock down and compared the two to know what best scientific advice to give.
Well, the fewer people that die from this avoidable disease, the better. And the less of the disease we have, the better our NHS will function in looking after all the rest of us. It is COVID-19 that is killing us and our people and our members of the general public, but it's also killing our economy. And the reason it's killing our economy is because it's not under control. Countries that get it under control have a much, much better economic performance over this last 6 months than countries like the UK that have totally failed to bring it under control.
I'm asking you for specifics because I'm aware of the reasoning. You've given us the reasoning, and other people in the country have also heard that reasoning from SAGE and as well as from government. But what I'm interested in is the specifics, because if you want me to believe you, which is, I imagine, the purpose of conversation, then what I'm really interested in is the scientific evidence for why we need to go into lockdown being compared with the scientific evidence for what happens if we don't, and then the death that can come from lockdown versus the deaths that can come from not locking down compared, and the costs of both compared, so we can have a joined up approach to this and a holistic approach to it. Have you done that work?
I would have done that work had I been a member of the cabinet, but it's actually the government. And it's the
no, but you're independent sage. You're making a recommendation to government. I'm hoping you've done your homework.
And we're making it on the basis of our scientific background.
Well, let me tell you, because I've done my homework, and I'm surprised you haven't. Shall I give you the cost per day? It's in today's newspapers. You could plot one out from Australia. I mean, if you want the British one, I'll give you the British one. But the Australian one, they've just come out of lockdown. They've given the cost per day there. But the issue is that actually, if your argument is about deaths, and I'm asking if you've looked into deaths that happen when you do lockdown as a consequence of the lockdown. I'm arguing if you look at costs, you're saying you want to protect the NHS. If we know the cost per day, could we use that money to protect the NHS without the lockdown?
Sorry, I can't follow your...
Okay,
if there is any logic there, I'm sorry, I can't follow
Okay, well, I hope there is. There's £2.4 billion a day it costs this country for lockdown. 2.4 billion a day, and I'm wondering if that money could be better spent on bolstering capacity in the NHS to avoid the things you're worried about.
Oh, don't be silly. You are really being stupid there. We went into this...
Sir, I can assure you, I asked you a question. If you're going to get offended, I'll just end the interview. What I did is ask you a question. Have you considered what we could do with that $2.4 billion?
Just let me answer you.
I would if you don't call me stupid. If you want to carry on insulting someone, we'll end the conversation. Is that how you'd like to go?
No, your question, I think...
Could you not have a conversation without calling anyone stupid? Is that okay?
I wasn't calling you... I said your question is a stupid question.
Right. Could you... Well, I would not be comfortable proceeding if that's how this conversation is going to go. So I'll ask you to continue this conversation without insulting anyone. Can you do that?
Let me answer your question.
Well, if you do so without insulting anyone, can we first agree and we can carry on this conversation? Otherwise, it's over.
I'm not insulting you. I think... Right. Look...
Yes. So let's continue talking without mentioning the word stupid, shall we?
I'll try and refrain.
Yeah? Right. No. Now, back to the... If I put the question, reset the question, and I'll let you answer because that was a bit of a distraction.
Let me answer the question that you
So
asked.
have you figured what this £2.4 billion a day could be used for if we don't go into lockdown?
You asked me about it being used to bolster the NHS.
Yes.
Let me answer the question, please. Yes. And it can't be used to bolster the NHS. We went into this whole period with an NHS which was already greatly deprived of resources. We have a huge shortage of doctors and nurses. We are reliant on importing doctors from all over the world to keep our NHS running, even in the best of times. And we know what was happening to waiting lists.
I'm sorry, how does that answer the question, Professor Scally? What could you do with £2.4 billion a day?
You can give the NHS as much money as you like, but they cannot magic up doctors and nurses out of thin air. They just can't. So
that's not really the allegation. That's not really what's being recommended.
But you asked me. Come on, you asked me about this. Using that money to bolster the NHS.
Yeah, not today.
I'm telling you.
Not today. That's the cost of the lockdown that happened in early in the year. So my question to you was that if we know what's going to happen, instead of going into a lockdown, if we could have used that money to build capacity for the whole year till we get to this point, let me put it to you another way. The drop in the... When we talk about stopping deaths, we have a statistician from Bristol University telling us that if there's a 6.4% drop in GDP, you get more deaths from the lockdown than you do from COVID. Has that been factored into your recommendation when you advise government?
But what, this view from a statistician in Bristol?
A 6.4% in GDP causes more deaths from poverty in Britain than the coronavirus.
That may well be, because we haven't got the coronavirus under control. And if we don't get it under control, the virus and the sick people and the dying people will overwhelm our society. They'll overwhelm the NHS and they will overwhelm...
I'm sorry, I don't think you answered my question. The question is that a drop in GDP that goes beyond 6.4% causes more deaths than that what you're talking of. It causes more deaths than coronavirus. And so if we factor in, if we're recommending to government that we need a lockdown, my question to you is, do we factor all of this in together, or are we only looking at deaths that result from coronavirus?
Well, the government, I'm sure, factors it all in together.
Do you, I'm saying, sir? Professor Scally, you're making the recommendation. I'm asking if you have.
Well, yeah, I look at it in quite a logical sense. If we don't have a lockdown, the numbers going into our hospitals and the numbers dying and the numbers getting long COVID will continue.
So you haven't. Is that the answer? No? You haven't looked at the comparative figures of deaths? Lockdown versus no lockdown? Because you're worried about deaths, as am I. You told me you
are. No, I think the point about it is if we can stop this virus, we don't need lockdowns. Lockdowns should be a last resort.
Yeah, but you're recommending one now. So I'm asking you about your opinion now, and I'm asking whether the opinion you've given to government, the advice you're issuing on air here now, is holistic. Have you compared? You're saying we need a lockdown. I'm asking if you've compared the deaths that come from lockdown and the consequences of the economic hardship versus the deaths that don't, and provided a holistic view. Or have you only looked at deaths that come from coronavirus?
No, we take into account the effect that the virus is having on our NHS and is having on our communities.